Now, in this section, we'll be discussing putrefaction in detail. As I've already told you, putrefaction is basically, it has two parts. There's an autolysis part, and then there is a environmental part in which the bacteria and the fungi from the environment also starts taking part in the putrefactive process. Now, what basically happens here is there is bloatment, there is marbling phenomena, and there is a discoloration that is given to the body. All of these give a mixed picture of putrefaction to the dead body. Now, this section deals with the sequence of changes that happens during the putrefaction, the factors affecting the putrefaction, and finally the timeline of putrefaction. The factors which are responsible for putrefaction, they can be a dried environment as well as a moist and a humid environment. Any pathological conditions can also contribute towards putrefaction. For example, there is a septic condition, for example, in septic abortions. There will be a speedy process of putrefaction. And why is that so? Because there will be a phenomena of Clostridium perfringens found in those cases. There can be any cases of sepsis. There can be cases of infections and inflammations already found in the body that will speed up the process of putrefaction. So these are all the factors that will come into action. Now, the sequence of putrefactive changes that will come into action is basically the larynx and the trachea is first of all involved. Moving on to the stomach, the intestines, and the spleens. The liver and the lungs are involved then afterwards. And finally, we have a liquefactive putrefaction in the brain. So there is basically changes in the larynx, in the stomach, the liver, and the lungs, and the brain is basically a liquefactive process. And it is followed by the uterus and the prostate, which is followed by the skin, the muscles, and the tendons of the body. Finally, the bones are involved. Now, the sequence of the putrefactive changes, what basically happens is there is a greenish skin discoloration on the right iliac fossa within first few days. Now, as I've already told you, what gives this greenish skin discoloration to the skin? It's basically the production of the gases due to the anaerobic respiration of the bacteria and the fungi. That is a normal flora to the body. That is followed by a more prominent spread to involve the remainder of the anterior abdominal wall and the other parts of the body as well. Moving on to the abdominal wall, the scrotum, the face becomes distended by the gases produced by the bacteria. Now, this is really important. When we say the face becomes distended by the gases, now it can be confused. Such a picture can be confused with cases of asphyxiation. So we have to keep in mind that a normal putrefactive process will always give these changes. Don't always consider if there is a picture, if there is a bloatment picture, it's not always a case of asphyxiation. It can be a normal putrefactive picture. Wait for the changes to disappear with time. If it does so, it is a putrefactive change. So we have to keep this in mind. So the normal, even the identification sometimes become difficult due to the bloatment of the features of the face. Then there is palpable crepitus. The tongue may swell, the eyes protrude. The facial features are basically distorted all in all, and the bloody fluid exudes from the mouth and the nostrils. After 1 week of this anaerobic bacterial actions, the bacteria spread through the venous system. And what happens is there is a characteristic marbling phenomena of the skin. Branching dark lines are found at the root of the neck, and they're found at the cecum and the flank areas. And basically the marbling process starts from these areas, and that involves the whole of the body. What is basically happening is the decomposed material due to the bacterial actions, it gives a discoloration to the venous system, and that is the bluish discoloration, and gives a marbling and phenomena to the skin. The arborescent marks are present on the skin. Now the hair becomes loose and superficial fluid-filled skin blisters appear. These skin blisters, as I've already told you, they can be confused with scalds formed by the hot liquids and the fluids. How will we distinguish that? We'll give an incision, and if there are any inflammatory products, if there are any signs of inflammation, that will establish that these blisters are due to the hot fluids. And if these blisters are the putrefactive blisters, it will only contain the gaseous material. Now, the skin discoloration changes to dark green fingerprint identification starts to become difficult. Now, although this happens that the identification becomes difficult, the fingerprints are damaged at this point. But later on, what happens is that the skin becomes loose, and even the gloving phenomena, we can preserve the skin for the fingerprints for the later identification. So you don't have to get confused over here. Now, finally, what will happen is the maggots and the rodents will appear, and due to the smell and due to the discharges, what will happen that all the predators in the environment and the surroundings will come into action. The bodily fat liquefies. Basically, the whole picture is pointing towards a slight and slow decomposition process that is basically leading towards the skeletalization of the dead body. Now, the factors influencing the putrefaction. There are a lot of environmental factors, there are a lot of bodily factors that will contribute towards racing the putrefaction process or retarding the putrefaction process. Now, the environmental humidity. As I've already told you, the environmental humidity will form an adipocere formation. That is basically a varied form of putrefaction and will give a fatty layer to the dead body. That indicates that the body was in a humid environment. Then there is bodily habits of the descendant. If there was any states of starvation, if he was in cases of malnutrition, the process of putrefactions are raced towards decomposition. Now, the cause of death is very important. The cause of death, whether it was due to asphyxiation, whether it was due to any inflammatory reactions, whether it was due to some septic abortions, due to any septic conditions of the body, they all race the putrefactive process. And the time of the putrefaction, the time that it takes of the putrefaction to take place is raced due to all of these factors. Now, the age of the person. The babies basically tend to putrefy slowly. Why is that? So it's basically the bacterial flora. They lack the bacterial flora. They have less sepsis. They have an aseptic bodies, and so the age is very important. Now, in old age people, the putrefaction process is raced on. The clothing and the covering. Basically, the clothing and covering slows down the putrefaction process because it basically covers the dead body, and it will basically slow down the process of putrefaction. Now, the temperatures. In higher temperatures, the body will putrefy more quickly, and in lower temperatures, the body will putrefy, or the decomposition process will be slowed down. Even at freezing temperatures, we can preserve dead bodies, and so we have to keep that in mind. Injuries to the body surface. Now, injuries to the body surface will basically relate to the inflammatory processes, and that will basically race on the putrefactive process. Now, the storing of the dead bodies phenomena is very important. We usually store, or we usually preserve the dead bodies at freezing temperatures, or there is another phenomena which is known as embalming phenomena. Now, in embalming phenomena, we inject particular chemicals inside the femoral vein or inside the carotid veins, and that will basically preserve the dead body. So there are basically these two. When if you're asked in your by your examinees about the preservation of the dead bodies, it can be in the freezing environment, and it can be due to some chemicals. The process is called as embalming phenomena. Now, the timeline of putrefaction. The timeline of putrefaction is very important. It takes about 2 to 3 days. The discoloration of the abdomen, the skin, and the swelling starts. And in about 3 to 4 days, the discoloration spreads, the discolored veins become visible. After about 5 to 6 days, the abdomen swells and the skin blisters are formed. In around 2 to 3 weeks, the abdomen is bloated. In about 3 weeks, the tissues softened, organs and the cavities bursting, and the nails start to fall off. And in about 4 weeks, the soft tissues begins to liquefy and the face becomes unrecognizable. Now, we have to keep in mind that sometimes all of these distended organs, the soft tissues and the cavities, they give an appearance of bruising or an appearance of sexual offense, which has not actually taken place. It's basically a part of the decomposition process. So we don't have to confuse this with any sexual offense activity that has taken place before death. That was end to this section, and in this section we basically discussed putrefaction, the process of putrefaction in detail, the factors affecting putrefaction, why is this process of putrefaction medico-legally important, and what basically it is pointing towards about the environmental factors. Thank you for watching sqadia.com.